Hello, my name is Neil Davidson and I'm the founder of Raw Umber Studios. Welcome to another online portrait drawing session. This video mimics the structure of a regular life drawing class. We'll show you 3 photographs on the screen, one for 10 minutes, one for 20 minutes and one for 30 minutes, and it's your job to draw the photograph that you see. Lizette Dingemans will be joining us. She'll be doing a demonstration in the bottom corner of the screen and giving hints and tips. Once you've finished, don't forget to post your work to Instagram and hashtag it with #RawUmberLive. Right, let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another Raw Umber video. I'm Lizette Dingemans and I will be painting along with you. I chose to paint this week because I've covered drawing quite intensely already and I want to do something different. There will also be a materials video on this week, so have a look through our Umber channel to see what materials I like to use. So I like to start with a neutral color and rub that all over my canvas just to get rid of the white. I used raw umber for this. I put a little bit on the canvas and then spread it out with tissue and a little bit of Sensador. The reason why I like to do that is because the white sort of can be a bit distracting when I paint. And this way I can rub out the lights and put in the darks using my raw umber. I'm only going to do monochrome this week. So it's sort of very similar to drawing, just slightly different materials. Of course, if you'd rather be drawing, feel free to do so. The techniques are all the same, just the materials are slightly different. The way I start painting is exactly the same like I would if I would be drawing. So first I'm going to do a rough outline using the box method that we spoke about in previous videos. And we will start taking it from there. Now, one thing that does happen with paint is that you can't put a line down without also putting a tone down. So there will be a little bit more crossover in between techniques. I'll take you through that when it happens. So the first thing I'm going to start looking for is the bottom of the box, so her chin, as well as the midpoint, which is the eyeline on her in this case. And as you can see, I'm starting to put in the masses much quicker than I would be if I were drawing. And that is just because painting doesn't lend itself very well to lines. You have to really get started using masses very, very quickly. This week, I will be only using tissue, brushes, raw umber, a little bit of Sensador for my painting. So I'm not going to be starting in color or using anything like that. Later, I may use a little bit of black to deepen the shadow somewhat, but that will be it. So it will be completely monochrome. Also, a thing to note is that I won't be speaking throughout the whole session. So if I am quiet for a little bit, it's not because the sound is gone or anything like that. I just have nothing to say at that point. So I will be speaking in a few minutes again. What I'm doing right now is just blocking in the big masses of light and shade fairly quickly. I'm still using the box method, but I don't need to draw it out every time. So I just try and keep it in my head. So for instance, I am measuring to see where the bottom of the lip is or the nose versus her eyes and that sort of thing. For people who are completely new and don't know what I'm talking about, first of all, welcome. I hope you'll find this useful and you're enjoying it up until now. Secondly, I do have some tutorial videos on what I spoke about each week. So check out the materials videos, for instance. I've also got one on how to structure the face using big blocks. Those might be useful to you to have a look at and you know what I'm referencing in these videos. Alright, so let's get on with the rest of this one in the meantime. I am just starting to get all my shadow shapes in. And again, like we said before, always work from big to small. So what I try to do is I work from the big mass of the side of the head and now working into the smaller masses of the eye sockets, the lips and the side of the nose. And what I'm trying to do is just start with some big shapes that don't necessarily need to be accurate and then start refining them as I go along. And the reason why I do that is because if you start with details straight away, you might get a little bit attached to them. And starting from big shapes, you already have a big view of the whole drawing. And as you start refining it, you'll start seeing smaller and smaller things. So hopefully what that means is that the whole drawing will slowly become more accurate and better as you add smaller and smaller shapes. And as you just saw, I like putting the paint on with the paintbrush and then going in with the tissue to remove some as well. So that helps making those shapes more accurate. So it's not like with this monochromatic method, which I actually often use in my underpainting, it's not like you can't undo things you have put on. So you don't have to be as scared of the paint in that way. You could just put something on and then rub it out with the tissue again. And that's why I really like this way of painting as a start for any painting I do. And again, of course, if you're not painting, the same techniques apply with charcoal and pencil. So it's better to just put something on and then correct it later than to be too scared to put something on and therefore, and then not actually have a drawing down after 10 minutes. So with these quick posts, it's all about practice and just getting things on as quickly as we can. Now what I'm going to do next is break down the eyes a little bit more. So I go from my big shapes now to my smaller shapes. And instead of the tissue, what I'm going to start using is a small brush. And what I do is I just push the paint in the direction I want it to go. So you can see I kind of wipe a little bit off with it. And what I do off camera is I use a tissue in my hand, and every time I touch the paint with that brush, I wipe it off with the tissue so it's nice and clean. Sometimes I also dip it into the Sensador, and the reason for this is like this I can get a real highlight. So you can see that on the eye, for instance. I first dipped it into the Sensador and then wiped some off using the brush. And this technique that I'm using this session is called a wipeout. So you're wiping out the lights, putting in the darks with your brush. And at this stage, I only use tissue for where I want big shapes or big soft edges. So for instance, the side of the head, I've just made it a little bit more subtle, a little bit less harsh using the tissue there. And I use the brushes for when I want clearer shapes and sharper edges. Okay, so it looks like we've got about 3 minutes left on this pose. So I'm going to continue developing my drawing as I described, and I will hopefully have a nice sort of block in. And what we're going to do in the 20 and the 30-minute pose, we're going to take these same techniques but take them a little bit further. So I'll see you in 3 minutes for the 20-minute pose. So here we are for the 20-minute pose. As I did for the first one, I'm first gonna just cover the canvas with Sombra Umber, and I use a little bit of Sensitor on my brush just to put it on the canvas, and then use some tissue to wipe it all so it becomes one even layer. I start going in with a big brush with Sombra Umber on, and use that to sketch out the big masses, so the side of her head versus the top of her head. Instead of first putting in lines, I go straight for the masses. That's the difference with drawing a little bit, where I now straight away go for those big shadow shapes. I'm going a bit quicker in this pose because I want to take this drawing a little bit further than I did the last one, so you can see what the next step would be. But don't worry if you're not that quick, just do it in your pace, and practice makes perfect. Now, people who have seen my last video may wonder what this sort of technique has to do with the box. I'm still using the same box technique, so you can see I'm now filling in the eye sockets, for instance, and I've got the side of her head and the width of the head versus the length, but I'm just skipping some steps because if you've done the box a few times, you don't need to draw every single line in anymore. You just sort of have it in the back of your head, and it gets easier like that. So it's sort of, at first you have to practice all those lines, and then you can sort of skip a few as you get quicker and quicker. So now I've got my big shadows in, and I am pretty confident of my bigger box. I'm going to start taking my tissue and my little brush, like the ones I used in a 10-minute video, and I start adjusting my shapes into smaller and smaller, more accurate shapes by sort of rubbering out those darker areas to make the eyes and the nose appear a little bit more clearly. This is the same as if you'd be working in charcoal or pencil. You start off with the big masses, and then you start to cut into them. So this is often what I say to my students. Already, you now know all the secrets of drawing anything ever. It's all just shapes and making those shapes more and more accurate. It's just doing it that's really hard and takes a lot of practice. And this is also the goal of these videos. Practice is the main thing. So it's great that we're doing this together every week. And as you can see, I'm using the small brush to remove paint and the big brush to put paint down. Really good practice is to always use the biggest brush you can find, because sometimes there's a tendency to put down loads of little strokes. For instance, for people who like Sargent, his work is a really good example of that. It all looks like he painted it in 10 minutes. In reality, he worked a long time on it, but it just looks like that because he used those big, big brushes. Now I'm gonna start making her face actually feel like her face and not a generic face. So the way to do that is to just put some more detail in and always keep refining those shapes. So what I start with is just the lips, just putting the shadow on the lower lip down and trying to figure out what the shape is of her actual lip. Do the corners go up? Do they go down? That sort of thing. Next, I'm going to start working on her eyes. Because she's looking to the left, I'm just going to remove some of the shadow where there's clearly the white of the eyes. One thing to note with the white of the eyes, naturally we think that white must be white, but often the eyes are actually in shadow because the brow overhangs a little bit. So the white of the eyes is never pure white. So very rarely do I make it the lightest thing in my composition. Another thing I can start doing is putting in the dark accents. So for instance, her iris, she's got nice dark eyes. So I'm going to start making those a little bit darker. And that also pulls some focus where I want it to be. Eyes consist of a few key planes. You have the lower lid, which always should be clearly indicated. Then you've got the roundness of the eye, including the iris. And then you've got the overhang of the top lid again. So usually what you get is a shadow where the top lid overhangs, and then light area where the lower lid catches the light. And those things are really important. Otherwise it feels like your eye doesn't have any lids. With the brow, there's also some key things that happen quite often in a model. Usually the brow is the darkest at the start of the brow and gets lighter nearer the side of the face. And there's often a little bit of light just hitting the brow bone underneath that bit of the brow, which gives it a little bit more of a sharper edge. With the mouth, what often happens is the corners of the mouth are slightly darker, and this is because the face is not flat. It actually curves round. So the middle of the mouth is usually the lightest because it's furthest towards the light, and the corners of the mouth are darkest because they are more deeply set into the face. With the nose, there are a few things that often happen in a model. So the nose usually has a shadow below it because it turns under. And it usually also has a slightly thicker bulb on the end of it. Gets a little bit more narrow near the bridge of the nose. And these are all things that you can look at to see what sort of nose someone has. Is it a little bit more bent or is it a bit more narrow? And that helps a lot with the likeness as well. So that brings us to the last 5 minutes of the pose. I'm going to do a little bit more refining and then I will see you at the 30-minute pose. All right, so here we are at the last pose already. And I'm going to start this pose exactly like we did the other ones, with some raw umber directly on the white canvas. For this last pose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it a little bit slower again and just start with the boxes, just to reinforce a little bit that it's the same technique as we did before, just now in paint. So I'm just going to start with the width versus the height, and I'm going to check what's in the middle. And in this case, her eyes, the corners of her eyes are bang in the middle, so that's really good to know. And like I said in a 20-minute pose, I'm not going to be doing line as such, because paint doesn't lend itself that well to line. So what I'm going to do is straight away block in the whole hair, which is all above her eyes, is all going to be dark, so that's what I'm going to block in straight away. As I said before, I really like working in thirds, so I can just put down the bottom of the nose and the top lip, and those are all a nice 1/3 down. I also can start putting down the center line very quickly. Sorry about my face being in the frame. I got a little bit too concentrated, I think, near the end of this pose, and I forgot about the camera, so sorry about that. In the meantime, I'm just filling in those big shadow shapes like I did in the other two poses as well, and just trying to get a generic sense of the planes of the face, and without worrying about if it's her face right now. And we'll get to that more as we get longer into the pose. We'll start working more on her face rather than a generic face. I'm just working out the eye socket side of the nose and the bottom of the jaw, as those are the main planes that I'm worrying about. The light is coming from the right, so everything on the left will be in shadow. Sometimes you might find that you can see stuff in the shadow and you think you should put that in, but generally I would hold back on that, because what you want is to emulate the light coming from one side. So putting a light accent in the shadow might sort of kill that impression a little bit. Because she's looking up, her ear actually won't be on the bottom of her nose and the top of her brow like it would be if she was looking straight at us. Because her face is lifted towards us, her ear in relation to that's a little bit lower. So actually I see it lining up with the top lip and the bottom of her eyes in this case. And like I did in the 20 minutes and the 10-minute pose as well, I used a tissue to sort of erase my paint marks, so I have a clear sense of where the light and the dark shapes are. And this is, I think for me, this is the easiest way to draw, just thinking about dark shapes and light shapes and trying to make those two connect. And that just simplifies the whole drawing process so much for me, because then I don't have to worry about detail and is that a little bit lighter, is that a bit darker, and you just simplify it for yourself, and that makes everything a lot easier. And again, I'm just refining the smaller shapes of the lips and the other features there once I'm happy with rough placements. I hope you're all finding the painting interesting as well. But do let me know if you prefer the drawing or you think the paint's a little bit confusing. I'm always interested in your feedback, so just comment down below. Also, if there's ever anything that you're really not quite understanding, you'd like to have a more in-depth video about, just also, I'm always open to suggestions and ideas, so let me know and I'll have a look at what I can do. So this style of painting I actually use for almost all my paintings that I end up doing in color as well. So this will be the first hour of any painting I do. And then once I've figured out my darks and lights and the shapes, I already have a lot of information there and I can start putting on color with a lot more ease on top of that. So I really like this method to start any oil painting. But again, of course, this is a preference that I have, and everyone has a slightly different one. So let me know what you think. Just a little side note about how to hold your brushes. The brushes are held the same way as you would the pencil. So hold it at the end, not at the start of the brush, so you can make a more strong mark that's less from the wrist and more from the shoulder. For me, it was a real life changer when I found out how to actually hold my pencil because I always pressed way too hard and I couldn't erase stuff anymore. So for me, that was a real it made a huge difference on what sort of marks I can make. It could suddenly be way more precise. So it's definitely something to check out if you haven't yet. In the meantime, I'm just gonna continue breaking down the shapes the same way I did in the 20-minute pose, and I'll get back to you in a second. Okay, so now I've got all my shapes in and I'm pretty happy with the likeness. Of course, it's not perfect, but with these quick ones, I try not to get too attached to the drawing and try to push it forward all the time. So what I'm going to do next is I am going to start putting a little bit of a darker accent in. So in this one, I'm actually going to use pure ivory black to get the shadow of her hair in. I'm only doing that black accent for the darkest bits in the shadows and not everywhere. And I feel like with painting and drawing, just like with many other things in life, less is more. So I always try to do the absolute minimum and keep things really, really simple. And often when I do that, I find that the painting actually reads more clearly to the viewer. Now what I'm doing is I'm coming in with my clean small brush and I'm just sort of wiping at the harsh line that I've made while I was still drawing. And I'm just sort of softening that up in places where it turns more softly instead of very suddenly. And I try while doing that to also make the shapes a little bit more clear and clean. So while I'm just working on the lips and getting those shapes right, I just want to thank you for joining us again if you were here last week as well. And also, I hope to see you next week. I'm just going to continue finishing my drawing a little bit, and I will hopefully see you then.
Thank you for taking part. Don't forget to photograph your work and post it on Instagram and hashtag it with hashtag #RawUmberLive. I'd like to thank Lizette Dingemans for drawing along with us today, and you can download the photographs you've seen in this week's session from the link I'm about to show you on the screen. You can follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't forget to like this video if you've enjoyed it.